All right. Hello and welcome everyone to the most used melee kind of builds breakdown type stuff that we've been doing and going over the top 10 builds of each weapon section. As a reminder, I've already made a video for the primaries and secondary weapons. Those can be found in the link below, where this video can also be found in the appropriate section on brozime.com, where I have a ton of all of my builds and notes and all kinds of Warframe information and guides. And speaking of the Warframes, if you would like to get any builds for any number of different Warframes, if you need a build for a Warframe, I have not done one of these videos for the top 10 Warframes because I have new builds videos for every single Warframe. That is also on brozime.com. Just search any Warframe's name and it will immediately pop up and give you the build for them. So with that stuff out of the way, let's get into talking about these melee weapons. Melee weapons are notably much closer than primary and secondary weapons in terms of overall usage. Things are, not as high on the high end, with the Xoris only coming in at 7%, with our next lowest being 10% as our number one most used. And things only get lower from there. Also worth noting, in terms of the melee weapons here, melee weapons overall, I would say, are falling out of favor with the advent of the new arcanes for primaries and secondaries, really pushing them ahead and making this much more of a gun game than a melee game as it was traditionally. But things for new players and players that don't have access to those arcanes because they're only available from the Steel Path, are going to be mostly melee focused. New players are very powerful in the melee department and not very powerful in the where the actually really strong stuff is, because they don't have access to that until much later. Starting with mainly the Xoris being the most used melee weapon in the entire game. The Xoris is a glaive that you get from the Deadlock Protocol quest, and it is absolutely excellent. This weapon is... it's just tremendous. It's good late, it's good early, and you get it early. So, first and foremost, the actual just full heavy attack build is here. Pretty normal stuff. It's a heavy attack build. You're going to see this build a lot with Sacrificial Steel, Killing Blow, Corrupt Charge. The thing that is unique to the Glaives is that they will tend to use a Volatile Quick Return, but this is absolutely not necessary. You could, of course, just go with more damage if you wanted to, or any number of other things that you could throw in here, but the increased blast radius is very nice. So, Volatile Quick Return is suggested even for new players. Of note, in the new player build, everything here is absolutely trivial to get access to. But if you're brand new, drop Volatile Quick Return, and you probably won't have Virulent Scourge right when you get this weapon, so just use the regular Toxin mod, and it's going to be more than plenty to get you through really anything. Even in Steel Path, as long as you're using something that synergizes fairly well with this, like Zephyr, you're going to be way more than fine. And it's going to be a good way to get you into those Steel Path areas. And then eventually you can move on to this if you don't move on to the weapon we're about to talk about in a second here. But before we get to the upgrade to the Xoris, we need to talk about the Broken War. So the Broken War is another free weapon you get, and this is for a mainline quest that you must do, that of course being Second Dream. You'll get Broken War, and it is a totally serviceable longsword. It is fine. There's no problems that I have with the Broken War. I think that longswords overall are a bit on like the weaker side, but this sees tons of usage because you get it for free, and it comes, with, it's already got like the full 60, it's got the catalyst, it's got just everything going for it already in terms of whenever you pick this up. And if you didn't pick up the Xoris before this, then there's not really going to be a better melee weapon that you have access to. That being said, this is the build for it, and it is notably considerably harder to put together. Blood Rush, you're going to be able to get only post Second Dream, so you're going to have to go get this, and it's a rank 10 mod, which makes it harder to access. Primed Reach is supremely helpful on a weapon like this because more range means hitting more enemies, but you can get away with regular reach, certainly. And of course, you have, stuff like Drifting Contact, Virulent Scourge, which you'll still probably not have post Second Dream, at least for a while. And it really comes down to, like, this build is a little bit harder to put together, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people just equip the Broken War because they're given it, and then just keep shooting whatever guns that they're using on whatever frame they happen to be. But yeah, things here, I mean, this is what you'd probably want to use. Vengeful Revenant also is like extremely rare. If you do not have Vengeful Revenant, hopefully you have Crimson Dervish, I guess. Iron Phoenix is given to everyone for free, so you will have that, but it is wrong polarity for this weapon. So yeah, kind of a tough thing overall. I would say that the usage of this weapon is mostly attributed to it just being given to you. Now, number 3, we have the first weapon that is not just given to you, and this is the massive, massive upgrade to the Xoris. Glaive Prime, a weapon that a lot of people wish that they had access to, and when it gets unvaulted is going to be extremely, extremely popular, probably even more so than it is here, and it is seeing quite a lot of representation, especially whenever you consider it's going up against 2 weapons that you are given. With that, the Glaive Prime is built exceedingly similarly to the Xoris in that it is exactly the same. So yeah, everything's pretty much identical here. I've got it on viral damage. Some people like to just build it more just like, you know, pure, I guess I would say, with like, you know, leaving Fever Strike in just for the upfront damage. But then throwing in like Banes, which you can do because this weapon is very slash focused. The big thing and the big reason the Glaive Prime is better than the Xoris is because whenever you do the heavy attack explosion with this weapon, it will guaranteed proc slash every time. With that guaranteed slash proc, immensely more damage is done. And even though the Xoris has a much larger AoE, actually, this pulls ahead just for the absolute raw damage available. Just being able to ignore armor with that slash damage and really just get through anything it's just invaluable. This is basically a Warframe ability that you can throw and explode enemies at wherever you need to, because you can just explode it when you need to. The flight time is also faster than the Xoris. Not that that particularly matters. But yeah, the Glaive Prime is just the raw, much harder to get upgrade to the Xoris. If you are using the Xoris currently, whenever this comes around on an unvaulting, make sure you farm it, because I don't see this weapon getting much cheaper in terms of platinum, because it's just going to be in such high demand with just how good it is. Will that change in the future? Maybe, but glaives always seem to cycle back into the meta if they ever cycle out, so if they ever nerf this weapon into the ground, I think we can be rest assured that it'll come back eventually anyway. Okay, with definitely the best melee weapon in the game out of the way, let's talk about another weapon that you get for free, that being the Skiajati. This weapon is the one that you get for the Sacrifice mission, and it is a katana. This is where we get introduced to our Umbral mods, and you will get 2 Umbral polarities on this weapon already, which you are hard-pressed to get rid of. Of course, they are good just being Sacrificial Pressure and Sacrificial Steel. With that being said, though, that does mean that you have kind of 2 builds that you can go for very easily. Personally, I lean towards the heavy attack build, as the katanas all have a heavy attack where they will always inflict slash, being very useful, especially whenever you would first get this weapon. This is just like kind of your standard, just like keep attacking enemies, like mash E type of build. Though, if you get to the steel path, the important thing that you should change is that you should be using the arcane dexterity for one of your weapons, so you can get the combo duration from that. And then just upgrading to Blood Rush here is going to be intensely, intensely more powerful than having to stick to Drifting Contact. So that is a thing to keep in mind. But generally speaking, I would say that you should just stick to the heavy attack build. That way you really just don't have to think about it. And you can just put kind of, you know, the strongest mods possible in here and really not have to worry. I will note that while Amalgam Organ Shatter is very nice on this weapon, it is definitely not needed, as we end up at 0.3 windup instead of our 0.2. So you could go a little bit more damage from the critical, multiplier being very slightly higher, or you could go with that extra speed. I don't think it's really going to matter in the long run, but it is an option, and a lot of people just aren't going to want to farm Amalgam Organ Shatter if all things are kept honest here. And yeah, so yeah, this is really not a hard build to put together. It's just 2 regular Forma. You do not need Umbral Forma because it comes with it, and it's, you know, really common mods, all things considered. Like Corrupt Charge is one you're going to get while you're farming your other corrupted mods almost assuredly, and you could use regular Fever Strike and regular Reach, and things won't change too much, as especially if you're using this as a heavy attack weapon, it's going to be more for like one big single target that's very tough anyway. So yeah, not much to like really consider here. You're mostly just going to use kind of the obvious stuff. Rounding out our top 5 here, we have another Nikana, the Nikana Prime. And before we talk about the Nikana Prime's build, which is going to be much the same, I wanted to talk about the statistical difference between the Skiajati and the Nikana Prime. So, on this, the Nikana versus the Skia, with the Nikana being on the left and the Skia being on the right, the Skia is faster, and it has very slightly more range, which are both important things, but the Nikana Prime has 9% more critical chance and 0.3 more critical multiplier at base. which are huge statistical differences. Besides that, the Skia does have 2% more status, but it's not a very big difference. And in terms of our overall weighting, the Nikana is much more weighted towards slash damage, meaning that we're going to get those procs much more often than we would get on the Skia anyway. And to round out all of that, it also is a pretty considerable chunk higher in terms of just its raw overall damage, which of course is going to matter too. So, all things considered, I would say that the Nikana is definitely the better Nikana if you're comparing the two, but to not stress about it too much, as of course the Skia you're going to get for free and it's going to be very easy to put together and everything else. And on the Nikana, it's, only going to come around on an unvaulting every once in a while, and it's harder to get, and you're going to have to pump more forma into it, and yada yada. With that being said, it's not very much more forma, it's just the one, but, it's a consideration. Same kind of deal here, too. If you will actually need a fourth forma if you want to, upgrade to dropping Drifting Contact, and then instead include Sacrificial Steel in here for the more upfront critical chance, which of course would be better, or if to include a Bane or whatnot, what else. You will need a Forma for those types of upgrades on this to remove Drifting Contact once you get into using the Arcane Dexterities and such, but overall, they're very, very similar weapons, with the Nikana Prime being better, though I would say that the Zaw version of the Nikanas is probably the overall actual best, but those are even more of a pain to put together than just waiting for the Nikana Prime to come around, in my opinion. So that's another consideration on top of that. Moving on. All right, up next at number 6, we have what I've noticed is a lot of people's personal favorite, that being the Kronen Prime. The Kronen Prime are the standout kind of very different choice overall on our top 10, with these being Tonfa. They are the only Tonfa represented, even though a few of the Tonfa are pretty good. And these Tonfa are, they're clearly the best ones. They are built incredibly similarly to what we've seen. Unfortunately, to go into the reason why a lot of these builds are incredibly similar, there was hybrid building, which allowed you to do combo builds plus heavy attack builds, but with the changes to focus and how those kind of broke down, those builds just pretty much immediately went away and weren't really worth it or possible anymore. And that's kind of what we're seeing across all of the regular non-special function melee weapons using heavy attacks, is that they are all built pretty much just like this, with more Forma being necessary to remove Drifting Contact and add whatever bonus you'd like. I will say the Kronen Prime tends to proc so much slash that I would really highly consider a Bane, but otherwise you're going to be just fine, including stuff like Sacrificial Steel, as that's going to be, considerably more upfront crit chance that you're going to be starting with and doing much more damage right away, which is, of course, very valuable. But you could go a lot of different directions. Some people would prefer to add, more attack speed, and attack speed is, of course, going to be extremely good here, although Primed Fury by itself is definitely enough if you're using Sovereign Outcast, which, pound for pound, Sovereign Outcast is the better stance for Tonfas. Gemini Cross is the other one, which I think is still quite good, but pound for pound, Sovereign Outcast is going to outpace it in pretty much all situations. Yeah, using Sovereign Outcast, it's a bit slower, though, so more attack speed could be necessary if you really wanted to just keep forward momentum in a higher way. But yeah, overall, it's a pretty simple build. Most melee weapons are. If you're basically swinging a sword, Prime Pressure Point, Reach, Blood Rush, Organ Shatter, viral damage, attack speed, and then combo or more crit are going to be your pretty much general go-to for any just regular swinging around melee weapon. And yeah, that's pretty much going to be what's what. Up next, we have a weapon that is very different from the Kronen Prime and how all of those regular slashy weapons are built, and that is the Stropha. The Stropha is a gun blade, and it is much more gun than it is blade. This weapon, similar to one that we're going to talk about at the end, is basically a heavy attack weapon, but also it's a gun. The unique thing about the Stropha is that it basically shoots a large, bubble AoE out in front of you, and it's very, very good at hitting certain types of weak points, and all of its damage comes as a kind of all-at-once wave, as opposed to coming in the form of pellets, like the Redeemer Prime does, which we'll talk about in a minute here. That being said, it's a heavy attack build. But the thing to consider here is that I am using Primed Fury. This does speed up how fast you can go through your heavy attacks, and it is very good. You do not need Amalgam Organ Shatter. I would much rather use an attack speed mod than use Amalgam Organ Shatter, because this will affect it much more. But if you just want more damage, you can, of course, use Banes and the like to pump that up. Also worth noting, on this weapon, I am on corrosive damage. For both the Stropha and for the Redeemer that we'll talk about, you're just going to change elements based on what the opponent you're fighting is weak to. If it's an enemy that's weak to radiation, you are going to use radiation. If they're weak to viral, you're going to use viral. Whatever the combined element is that they're weak to, or that is going to ignore the most armor or whatnot, that is going to be what you are going to use. So that's pretty much the long and the short of it. Most of the time, for just like regular mission doing, you're going to be on corrosive, and if you're going to be using this weapon on like a boss type enemy, you're going to switch it to radiation, and that's really going to be that. Okay, up next, we're getting back more on track with the just very regular builds for weapons, and that is the Guandao Prime. The Guandao Prime, incredibly similar to the Kronen Prime, but I would say with just less forced slash procs and kind of just a worse moveset overall. That's going to be this. The Twirling Spire, it's quite good. It's a very solid stance, but it's just not as good as the Kronen's or the Nikana's stances, I would say. It is built identically. The exact same advice with Drifting Contact applies. You will need this if you do not have a Dex Arcane, and you will replace this if you do have a Dex Arcane. It is really, really as simple as that. That being said, you can get away on this weapon and on most weapons, really, switching Prime Fury down to Quickening, which is not losing very much attack speed, and then swapping out Drifting Contact as needed is going to save you a Forma, and that's the only thing that's really worth mentioning here. But yeah, Drifting Contact replaced with Steel, replaced with a Bane, yada yada, the normal stuff. Also, a thing that I just realized I have not mentioned yet, you can, if you want to, use Condition Overload. Condition Overload, it is, if you use a primer, a whole lot of damage. But in 99.9% of cases, using a primer is going to be slower than simply just killing the enemy with the thing that kills them instantly, as opposed to having to apply one thing and then kill them with another. So generally speaking, I don't advise Condition Overload to anyone who's not going to be like in a survival mission for over like 4 or 5 hours. It's usually just never going to be worth it outside of situations where you need to do something like that. But yeah, that's the Guandao. It's a regular slashy weapon. It uses the regular slashy build. All right, come back around to number 9. We have another weapon that you are simply, well, not simply, I suppose, but one that you are given for free, and that is the Paracesis. This weapon you're given by Bolus, and you can build it, and it has 40 ranks. So you're going to level it a bunch of times and yada yada. It is a heavy blade, though. Most notably, it is a heavy blade, and with the rework that happened with Melee, heavy blades were absolutely like gutted, completely neutered. All of their stances were made immeasurably worse. So while the best thing you can use is Tempo Royale, the old days of like Cleaving Whirlwind being a good stance and Tempo Royale being like a more mobile stance, that's pretty much all over now, with Tempo Royale and Cleaving Whirlwind both being quite mid, and with, you know, the regular slashy build being applied. But yeah, overall, the Paracesis, it's a weapon that you get for free, but given the choice between this or Broken War, I'm probably going to go Broken War. And given the choice between Broken War and the Skia and the Xoris, I'm going to go with the Xoris or the Skia for different reasons. And then, of course, the Xoris is pretty clearly the best in most situations, given the fight between those two. But yeah, it's a weapon that you are kind of given, and, you know, it goes to rank 40, gives a lot of mastery, I guess, but there's not really anything actually positive to say about the performance of the Paracesis. It's okay. You can use it in a heavy attack format as well, but the heavy attacks for heavy blades are not particularly good. So yeah, overall, it's fine, and you're given it, so that's a whole thing. And finally, coming to the end of our top 10 most used melee weapons here, we have the Redeemer. The Redeemer, a long-term mainstay of being used. This has kind of been replaced in a lot of ways by the Stropha, but the Redeemer still does have its play in many locations. The big difference between the Redeemer and the Stropha is that the Stropha hits a much wider area and is much better at killing groups of enemies, whereas the Redeemer has more particular uses. The Redeemer is good against enemies where there's limitations on how much damage you can do per hit, because the Redeemer is a, you know, shotgun, so it has many more pellets to be able to hit enemies with. It's better against, you know, a lot of different situations where you're basically going to have that be the case. If there's limitations based on hit count, or you need to hit an enemy a particular number of times, you're going to have a better chance with the Redeemer, because it's going to hit like 12 times as opposed to once that you're going to get out of the Stropha, and it's going to happen instantly. It's the exact same build, though. This is the heavy attack build for weapons. The same rules as, you know, the Stropha pretty much go here. Whatever damage type your opponent is weak to is what you're going to bring. The Redeemer, even more so than the Stropha, is for singular hard targets, so use it as such. It is very, very good, and if you're lucky like me, you can get some nonsense like this, but even if you go down that road of getting some nonsense bullshit Riven, comparing it to the Stropha, it's still really just the two different use cases for this type of weapon, and not much is going to change outside of that. But yeah, that is going to do it for our top 10 in terms of melee weapons here. Overall, melee is struggling. The most used stuff is the stuff that you get for free, and we've got some pretty clear front runners at the top here with Glaive Prime and the Xoris, and with the Nikanas, of course. And besides that, melee weapons just in general are falling behind everything else, and I think just not really being cared about in terms of what you equip. Most loadouts, as it stands, especially like based on what I'm doing, I just slap the Glaive Prime on if I don't have a particular use weapon, like the Stropha or the Redeemer. Those are pretty much going to be my go-tos in terms of what I'm actually choosing for missions, and anything else is going to be more of just a for fun pick, which is more than fine, of course, but I think that regular swinging it around type weapons, like we've been talking about, even stuff like the Nikana Prime, they really need something extra to push them towards being used as much as, say, like the Kuva Brahma or something of that nature, because they just can't compete with those types of weapons, and that's why we're seeing people fall away from melee and just really use it as the bridge to get to those very powerful primaries and secondary weapons. But yeah, that's the top 10 most used melee weapons for 2023. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you tomorrow. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. And, of course, as usual, thank you very much to all of the new and returning patrons that we have, and especially to the super patrons, $10 plus patrons. So that is Brutus Salazar, Dylan Dworsky, Thrain, Avon, James Harthorn, JC4 Science, Jefferson Clark, Joshua Adams, Lou Zanth, Malek X. Williams, Minty Ginja, Mitchta, Nicholas Gridley, Paradise, Remoxidate, Shan Hardian, Zach Zaner, and Zeraphir. Also, of course, thank you to the rest of the patrons, $5 and $2 patrons. And thing that I just wanted to note, we have news on Duviri. That's going to be next month. So this month, I think I want to do 2 different new player free-to-play throughs. One for the Duviri stuff next month, and I think I want to do one this month. So look forward to that happening, and this will probably be on the end of a couple of those videos whenever it does happen. But yeah, I think there's going to be some free-to-play through progress there for people who have been waiting for that, and that's going to lead to a bunch of new guides. So yeah.